Thanks a lot for joining. Carlo Dapino here. I'm at lesson 12 today. So let's see the syllabus of our course. We are exactly at DNS and security. Why in cloud most implementation sucks. So it looks like a clickbait kind of title, but there is a reason for that. So I could approach this lesson talking about all DNS threat modeling and explaining how new way and new protocol in DNS are anyway reducing the visibility, like DNS over HTTP. As so, there are tons of conversation in DNS that can reach a level of complexity, also in terms of cryptography. But if you streamline the attack surface, is generally based on faking to be the DNS, using polluting DNS cache, and redirecting the user to something else. So this one is the streamline, the easiest way to see the DNS surface. I don't like to go through all theoretical part, and I explicitly claim in this title to be about cloud. So I want to show you why right now there is a false sense of security in DNS space in cloud. So to do that, I want to base everything on fact. So we can reduce the size. Here we go. So in this article, you'll see how Route 53, that is the DNS service of AWS, got compromised, and somebody claimed to be that and started to get requests. Here is talking. They got traffic from more than 15,000 different AWS customers and a million endpoint devices, all after registering a phony AWS name server. So if something happened like that in June 2021, you can imagine that the false sense of maturity that we have on these cloud service providers are not always up for the game. So we trust the DNS to have basic control around the rogue DNS. And this one is an example of 2021. So you'll see a lot of video talking about the history of a DNS. There is so much good stuff on DNS. I have to be honest, it's probably the topic where you'll find more useful papers and are really based on the type of configuration that you are doing too. So this talk want to raise awareness on the sense of file security that DNS is introducing cloud service provider. So you could wonder how is doing Azure at this stage because Route 53 is just the AWS. We got 2 hours of outage still in April 2021, and we discovered that the problem was the cache. So Azure DNS servers experience an anomalous surge in DNS queries from across the globe. And you see how is repeating the same pattern. So here the target was the DNS edge cache, but you'd expect that the normal service is already protecting from that. And it wasn't the case. So an inability, an availability kind of attack on a cloud service provider of the size of Azure means a lot. And so even the 2 hours are a lot. But what I want to add is the complex design that you can have in Azure. And this specifically to Azure because there is also the ID function that can have also an hybrid architecture. And so I'm going to explain you. In all my video on top, you have a URL. I'm touching briefly to keep the video short, but I want to let you to have a reference of all documentation that I referred to. So here you see that you can have also extended a DDES to Azure. You can have a split brain DNS configuration. So you see how the implementation is changing the attack surface. So in the same way of a IAM, where having, for example, an hybrid AD can allow a lateral move, you need to understand that in DNS, the conversation is about a public DNS having information also of your private DNS record. And most of the time, these environments are anyway connected through express route and a privilege link. So what I'm trying to stress is that DNS hijacking was an issue also for Google Cloud Platform abuse. So we see here a recent 2019 attack that was extremely targeted around the abuse of Google Cloud Platform, and it was targeting a D-Link router. But it's not interesting who was targeting, but the way how it happened. Because DNS hijacking is something that you not expect if you have a DNS provider in cloud, because you expect that there are kind of mitigation. It's also important to stress how malware is always using DNS for filtration. And I will touch some configuration caveat, for example, in AWS that is quite specific. But don't forget that the DNS exploitation is not just about the DNS service, is also the exfiltration channel where you can tunnel, and is well known and well used because most of the rules sometimes allow that. So this one is the case where I take this example of malware using DNS filtration and I give you some caveat of a default configuration. This one is a good article. Check it out that because it's worth. Customers can utilize AWS DNS infrastructure in VPC enabled by default. So this one is a default configuration that allow the VPC anyway to do to bypass outbound firewall rules. In this way, in this fashion, if nothing was done on the VPC in terms of tuning, you could bet as an attacker to be capable to exfiltrate data. And DNS exfiltration, as is stressed out, can occur when an internal DNS server is configured to forward external requests to upstream DNS servers. And this one is a scenario that is happening over and over and over, especially in cloud migration, where you are actually trying to see and be cloud first. You are trying to remove a dependency from on-prem DNS. And so the footprint and the attack surface will change and will get worse. So when you talk about the threat model of a DNS, as I told you before, think also how interact with all these cloud services, internal services like VPC in this example. It's the only way to have a full model. OWASP did an interesting threat modeling exercise you have here about the DNS. It can worth to have a look to that. It's not really specific like I do right now for cloud. And so you can overlook something, but it is a good reference in terms of threat modeling if you are curious to enlarge the topic. So what's the outcome of this conversation? Stop to have a false sense of security that if you receive a service from a cloud service provider, that's secure by design. It's not the case. And I just show you that is not with fact. Don't focus only on the DNS threat modeling, but think a lot about the exfiltration channel, and especially the example that I give you here about the VPC configuration by default is something that you should keep in mind from an exfiltration perspective as well. Don't forget to test stuff and don't just believe that you get the service and is okay. Another great problem that you are having with DNS right now is also the the third level domain, the typical takeover. And so you are having DNS that are not actually linked to a real hosted source and get kidnapped. And so it's a sub takeover, is called. Is a is a basic, easy peasy kind of way where you claim back that domain record, but you need to pay attention. That is also one of the most common that you find in platform like HackerOne for the bug bounty. And so just to explain that something that is so common, it didn't get a reply from the cloud service provider trying to mitigate that. For example, looking up and trying to see if there is any record that is not properly configured. So there are some controls right now because it is starting to get known, but it's something that you need to keep in mind. And so don't take a service with this idea that is perfect. Always do your threat modeling. It has to be specific to you, also in terms of edges. And if you are doing A/B testing and you have, for example, a third provider like a CDN giving you a CDN VIP and doing the DNS by from where is coming the client, geoload balancing, you need to pay attention to that too, because you have a chain of event. When you have forwarder, trying to think how an attacker can abuse the forwarder itself. So don't expect that the rule that is just in one direction. Zone transfer is still basic, but is a really good way sometimes even to get stuff. So look at the API of the documentation of the service that you're using, trying to understand which field and which option you do have and which can be fast, abused, used, misconfigured. So the problem is the idea around the industry is that you should have a service that is well hardened and you are okay. It's not true because the combination of products that you're using, like the VPC with the DNS, is important too. So don't focus on just one service, focus on who use that service. For example, VPC in the configuration and your rules. I hope I give you enough food for thought. I don't want to stress you out too much for that. I want to make you thinking and investigate. As you saw, I collected only stuff that is recent about production configuration, and we are talking about people that kidnapped the request and create a DNS rogue DNS server. So things that you'll suppose are already fought by the service provider itself. Be careful about DNS. The footprint of cloud DNS is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you don't establish the right way to see the interaction and how it is can be abused, is not okay because you find yourself that most of your pen tests are having as a scope an application. So you could have a good pen tester that does obviously this check just against that specific application. You should think about DNS as a service in its own and for the overall picture too. And this migration forwarding from on-prem to cloud or the reverse where you are publishing private zone is extremely important. Some can be seen as information gathering, others are a bit more complex. Think of it in the picture on the long term. you'll add other DNS capability also on sd-wan stack. And so you can find that your client get redirect and use multiple DNS and not just as a forwarding only. So keep the big picture on check and zero trust on the cloud service provider too. Okay, thanks a lot. Subscribe. My channel does have a playlist with all lesson that we are discussing. There are other videos too. I hope you'll find it interesting. Subscribe so you'll be notified when I release new content. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.